Hello everyone, this is Mr. Miles. I just want to do a quick video explaining the assignment and the material for Thursday and Friday in American literature. So if you were not here, hopefully you've already watched the Native American video and the creation myths video and done the assignment and the readings for those. So if you have, then this is the next thing on the list. This is the colonial, we're starting to move into the colonial era, and we are getting into today John Smith's General History of Virginia. So before you start reading that, though, I want you to just take a quick look at this PowerPoint right here that I posted, the John Smith PowerPoint, Colonial Era PowerPoint. You don't have to read the whole thing. It's only just a couple things that are important. The slides sort of go into a summary of the general history of Virginia. So if you're having trouble maybe understanding what's going on in that text, you would probably want to come back to this PowerPoint summaries of each section of that narrative. But really the main thing to kind of get out of this is this narrative takes place in 1606. It's written by John Smith. He was a colonist who became leader and basically the guy in charge of the Jamestown colony over in Virginia. So what he did is he wrote a narrative about how the colony became successful and how they managed to sort of become a permanent staple in the New World. Now, here's the thing that we need to bear in mind about John Smith. He writes his narrative about himself in the third person. So when he's writing something about himself in the third person, what that does is it makes him seem objective, makes him seem unbiased, makes him seem impartial, okay? But you'll find out as you're reading that his tone, his attitude toward various parts of his narrative is very biased. It's very subjective. And the goal for us as we read John Smith's narrative is to look and see, how does he show his bias? How does he show his favoritism or his dislike of certain things, even though he's pretending to be objective the whole time? So this is something to pay attention to as you read, and we're going to annotate for that, and I'll show you how in a second. The other thing to pay attention to as you read, his writing is very old style. It's very archaic, so he uses a lot of big words. He uses a lot of, if you ever read like the King James Bible or Shakespeare, a lot of these and thous and things like that. So upon reading it the first time, it may be somewhat difficult to kind of get a handle on. So I would suggest reading it slowly. Practice patience as you read. Use context clues. Look around the sentence or look around the word to kind of figure out maybe what he's referring to. Just read it slowly. It's no rush to get through it. It's a short passage, and I've broken it up into sections for you. So really, just take your time with it, and it'll make sense. All right? So once you finish kind of looking over the PowerPoint, if you go right here to John Smith, General History of Virginia, what you'll have is this document right here. And what this is on the left-hand side, I've got his narrative, his story, the General History of Virginia. And what I want you to do is two things, okay? As you read, because it is kind of a older style of language, I want you to translate it. Now, do I want you to rewrite the entire thing? No. So please listen when I say this. I do not want you to translate the entire thing into modern day vernacular. I don't want that. Just paraphrase the high points over here in the right-hand column, okay? Just paraphrase those high points. That's all you have to do, okay, for each section. The other thing I want you to do is I want you to annotate. I want you to highlight. I want you to underline or mark specific parts of the narrative that do one of three things, okay? These things right here. So first thing I want you to annotate for is John Smith's attitude or his tone toward the Native Americans. Can you occasionally see how he expresses his feelings, his sentiment toward the Native Americans? I'll go ahead and tell you, he's a colonist, he's an Englishman, so his attitude toward the Native Americans is probably not very positive. So look for anything that might stand out to you there, like him using the word savage or barbarian instead of Indian or Native American. Second thing I want you to look out for is John Smith's attitude toward the other leaders in the Jamestown colony. Jamestown did not start under John Smith's leadership. He was originally just a colonist, and there were other people in charge. John Smith was eventually sort of, not really elected, but sort of chosen to be the next guy in charge of Jamestown after a couple of guys bungled it and messed up while they were in charge. John Smith's attitude toward them is going to be very negative. He's going to make them look like fools. And so I want you to pay attention to that as you read. And the last thing I want you to do is I want you to annotate John Smith's attitude about himself. Okay? Because remember, he's writing in the third person, but John Smith is writing about himself. So I need you to pay attention to, how does John Smith describe himself, or how does he sort of characterize his own actions during this? He makes himself look really good. He makes himself look very competent compared especially to the other people in the colony. And with his leadership, Jamestown is thriving. Without his leadership, Jamestown is tearing itself apart. So pay attention to those three things while you're reading, and I would just annotate them. Okay? So just to kind of give you an idea of what we're doing here, let me just read kind of a little bit of the first section so you get a feel for what I'm asking of you. So being thus left to our own fortunes, it fortuned or happened that within 10 days, scarce 10 among us could either go or well stand. Such extreme weakness and sickness oppressed us. So remember, this is before John Smith was elected or chosen to be the leader of the colony, right? So what he's saying here is all these people are sick and they're dying and they're so weak they can barely even stand up. Okay? So obviously Jamestown is really suffering right now. And thereat none need marvel if they consider the cause and reason, which was this: while the ship stayed, our allowance was somewhat bettered by a daily proportion of biscuit, which the soldiers on the ship would pilfer, to sell, give, or exchange with us for money, sassafras, furs, or love. But when the ship departed, there remained neither tavern, beer house, nor place of relief, but the common kettle. Had we been as free from all sins as from gluttony and drunkenness, we might have been canonized for saints. So what he's saying there is the colony is so desperate that they're essentially asking the sailors on the ships to steal food from those ships and give it to them in exchange for random goods that the colonists have. So they're that desperate for food. They're just basically asking the sailors from the ships to steal some of their own food to give to them. But our president, Wingfield, would never have been admitted as a saint for engrossing to his private oatmeal, wine, oil, liquor, beef, eggs, or what not but the kettle. So this is important here because John Smith just characterized the colony as starving. Everybody's sick. They're so sick and weak and malnourished they can barely do anything. And now he's talking about the president of the colony, the guy in charge, Wingfield. And the way that he characterizes him is that while all these other people over here, the normal people, are starving and dying, Wingfield is hoarding all of this nice food, beef, liquor, oil, wine, eggs, all this nice food to himself, while everybody else is eating moldy biscuit, moldy bread from the ships. So that would be something, according to my directions here, that's John Smith's attitude toward other leaders in the colony. So I would want to highlight that. And on the right-hand side here, I would want to sort of paraphrase. John Smith says that the guy in charge is stealing or hoarding resources and food for himself, okay, or something along those lines. I'm just sort of paraphrasing what's happened so far. So the guy in charge is taking all this food for himself. Meanwhile, the colonists are starving. So that right there shows you John Smith thinks of himself as awesome. This guy is not doing his job, at least according to the way John Smith would have him do his job. So this is sort of what I'm looking for in terms of what I need from you guys. So I'll I'll skip on down just to kind of show you some other examples of the other two things I want you to annotate for. So if you go down section 2, this right here. But now is all our provision, which is the food, the sturgeon gone, all helps abandoned, each hour expecting the fury of the savages. So he's saying that they're starving, and every minute they're expecting an Indian attack. And look what he refers to them as, not Native Americans, but savages. When God, the patron of all good endeavors, in that desperate extremity, so changed the hearts of the savages, they brought such plenty as their fruits and provision as no man wanted. So he's saying the natives suddenly changed their mind and said they don't want to attack us. They want to give us all of their food and provision and crops. How generous of them. But you notice, if you read closely, John Smith does not give them credit for that. Instead, he says, oh, God, the patron of all good endeavors in that desperate extremity, so changed the hearts of the savages. So it's saying, I'm not giving the natives credit for giving us food. God suddenly made them nice to us, and that's why they gave us their food. So John Smith already is kind of showing you a negative view of these Native Americans. Okay, so I would highlight that and then write out next to it, the Native Americans are nice because of God, not because they feel sorry for the colonists, which is probably what really happened. The natives probably saw how badly these colonists had it, and they felt sorry for them. But John Smith is not doing that. He wouldn't want to credit the natives too much with feeling sorry for people. Why would they feel sorry for us when they're savages, right? So he's going to say God did it. And the other thing that I want to look for is his attitude toward himself. Okay, so if you go down to the bottom of section 2, you kind of get a 2-for-1 here. He talks bad about the other president, the new president, because they got rid of Wingfield, they put Ratcliffe in. The new president, Ratcliffe, being little beloved, of weak judgment and dangers, and less industry and peace. So people hate him. He's not very well liked. So again, bad-mouthing the other leaders. They committed all things abroad to Captain Smith, which is, again, bear in mind, John Smith writing about himself, who by his own example, so he's leading by example. He's saying, I'm going to be the first one out there to work, and I'm going to be the last one to leave, but no one's going to work harder than me. Good words, fair promises, set some to mow, others to bind thatch, some to build houses, others to thatch them, himself always bearing the greatest task for his own share. So in that short time, he provided most of them lodgings, and again, neglecting any for himself. I'm going to build everybody in the colony a house before I build my own house. Well, how generous of Captain John Smith to do that. And of course, how humble of Captain John Smith to write about how generous and humble Captain John Smith is. So again, that would be a little bit of author's tone rolling in here. There'd be a little bit of, this is John Smith puffing himself up to make himself look really good, especially in relation to all the other guys who have been in charge before him. So this is what I want you guys to do. I want you to read through it and do what we had just been doing. Annotate, paraphrase for any of those things that I previously mentioned. Okay? So how does John Smith feel about himself, the other leaders in the colony, and the Native Americans? Do that, and you are good for this week. When we come back next week, we will have a sort of a contrasting colonial account that is very different from the way John Smith tells his story. So we're going to compare and contrast those two things when we come back next week. But for right now, I just need you to do this. If you have any questions or anything, please don't hesitate to ask. Okay? Have a good weekend, and I'll see you next week.